I'm here to talk to you today about the new second issue of RIS 2711 RST Letter Differential Permissible Speeds classification. And to start off with, I'm going to talk about what is meant by lettered differential permissible speeds, or LDPSs as I'll refer to them in this presentation. Permissible speeds set the maximum speed at which trains can operate over a section of line. On some sections, a single speed applies to all trains. At others, differential speeds apply. Differential speeds describes the situation where different types of trains or rolling stock are permitted to travel at different maximum speeds on the same section of line. Lettered differential permissible speeds, LDPSs, are a type of differential speed that provides a permission to allow certain rolling stock with specific characteristics to travel at a higher speed than other vehicles over that section of line. LDPSs are identified on the network by letters that indicate the categories of rolling stock that can travel at the speed in question. The letters include SP, EMU, DMU, MU, and HST. So that's what LDPSs are. Now a little bit of history. LDPSs were first introduced in the late 70s, early 80s as a low-cost means of allowing rolling stock that was new at the time to travel at faster speeds than the vehicles they were replacing, and do so without the need for costly infrastructure works. Over time, LDPSs have been implemented on different parts of the network according to need, for example, due to fleet introductions or cascades, and often using local or regional mechanisms. So there generally hasn't been a national approach to the requirements for rolling stock or infrastructure associated with the different letters. More recently, this has meant some difficulties for operators on routes where existing LDPSs are in place and who are seeking to establish compatibility to operate at those LDPSs for new or cascaded rolling stock that's being brought in to replace or supplement the vehicles the LDPSs were originally put in place for. And no doubt there are some people viewing this presentation who have first-hand experience of this. And finally, just to clarify, whilst there are other types of permissible speed, for example, enhanced permissible speeds, temporary speed restrictions, emergency speed restrictions, etc., none of those are within the scope of this standard. And today we are only talking about the requirements for LDPSs. The standard that's being published now is issue 2 of RIS 2711 RST. And the aim of this RIS is to set out criteria for rolling stock to belong to the different LDPS categories. Essentially, what does rolling stock have to be like in order to be classified as SP, HST, etc. Issue 1 of RIS 2711 RST was published in 2019, and it used the output of RSSB research project T996 to set out requirements for rolling stock to be classified as SP. SP is sometimes referred to as sprinter, but I prefer not to use that term because rolling stock doesn't have to be a traditional BR sprinter to be able to make use of the SP LDPSs. So now we're publishing issue 2, and this expands on issue 1 to also include requirements for the MU and HST classifications. These are both based on the output from a new RSSB research project, T1163, which was published last year, and both T996 and T1163 are available on Spark. The requirements for SP are for units that impart very low forces on the track, so that they can run over less robust track at higher speeds whilst generating track forces that are no worse than other trains running at lower speeds. The new requirements for the MU and HST vehicles also concern forces imparted on the track by the rolling stock, but with different input values and limits. And there are also requirements for levels of cant efficiency at which the rolling stock can operate, braking performance, and route availability, or RA number. Now, T1163 only produced recommendations for the MU LDPS category and not for the DMU and EMU categories, because it concluded that there is no longer a need to differentiate between these two, and the purpose is served by the MU category alone. So for that reason, there are no requirements in RIS 2711 RST for DMU or EMU rolling stock categories. Though to be clear, this does not mean that any changes need to be made to existing locations on the network where there are EMU or DMU speeds signed. Indeed, this standard, as is normally the case, is not retrospective. So existing unit types that are already agreed to belong to any of the existing LDPS categories will not have to demonstrate that they satisfy the requirements in this RIS to continue using the LDPSs where they currently operate. What publication of this RIS should do, though, is enable rolling stock builders, owners and operators to determine whether new, modified or cascaded rolling stock can, in general, make use of the various categories of differential speeds and support the route compatibility process on individual lines. Now I say in general because establishing that rolling stock meets the requirements to belong to a particular LDPS category does not remove the requirement to also undertake the normal route compatibility process when looking to introduce the rolling stock to a new route or change its speed. And this is because the LDPS categories are quite focused and don't assess all compatibility factors. So, for example, LDPS categories are not concerned with gauging. So it's quite possible that gauging restrictions could prevent some rolling stock in the MU category from being able to travel at an MU LDPS in a particular location. Now, T1163 looked at both sides of the system, that's the rolling stock and the infrastructure. So to accompany RIS 2711 RST, a new infrastructure standard, RIS 7706 INS, is also being produced based on the findings of T1163, and this is to cover making changes to LDPSs on the network. And this is due for publication in September. So together, through supporting the industry to make continued use of the possibilities that LDPSs bring, whether through supporting rolling stock design or cascade decisions, or supporting the introduction of new LDPSs on the infrastructure, or their removal where they're no longer necessary, these standards together support an estimated £12.5 million benefit to the industry over a 10-year period,